My MIL treated my husband like her personal ATM, so I finally told her off. I'm posting this on a throwaway because I'm still shaking a little bit from the fallout, and I know my MIL or one of her flying monkeys might stumble across this. I'll probably take it down eventually, but right now, I'm sitting in my living room watching my husband sleep on the couch with our daughter, and I feel like I'm at a breaking point. I need to know if I'm the villain here or if I'm just the only person willing to say what needs to be said. I, 23F, and my husband, 25M, have been together since I was 13 and he was 15. That's a decade. I have watched this man grow from a skinny, terrified boy into a hardworking father. We met because he started working for my dad. My dad owns a farm and a mechanic shop, and back then, he hired this 15-year-old kid who showed up on a rusted bike asking for work. Even at 15, he worked like his life depended on it, because it did. At the time, he was living with his mother and his stepfather. To call that man a stepfather is an insult to the word. He was a monster. He was physically and verbally abusive, a professional manipulator who spent his days finding ways to make my husband feel small. He would call him worthless, a burden, and a mistake. And the stealing, God, the stealing. My husband would save up his meager farm pay to buy something for himself, like a new pair of boots or a video game, and the stepdad would lose it. We all knew he was pawning my husband's things for drug money or booze. And through all of it, his mother sat there. She didn't just stay silent, she actively enabled it. She has this keep the peace mentality that really just translates to sacrifice my oldest son so my husband doesn't yell at me. Every time my husband complained, she'd say he was being dramatic or that he needed to respect his elders. When she had her two younger children, 8F and 5M, the dynamic shifted from abusive household to total neglect. His sister is nonverbal and on the autism spectrum, and his brother is a high-energy 5-year-old. When they were born, my husband basically became their third parent. He was 15, 16 years old, coming home from a 10-hour shift at the farm, only to be handed a screaming baby while his mom and stepdad went out to clear their heads. He moved out at 16. My dad basically gave him a room in our barn converted into an apartment because he couldn't stand to see the kid go back to that house. His mother didn't even put up a fight. She didn't cry. She didn't tell him she'd miss him. She just asked, "Who's going to watch the kids on Friday nights now?" I need to mention this because it's a huge part of why I am so protective. My husband is undiagnosed, but after being with him for 10 years and working as a paralegal, where I deal with all sorts of personality types, I am 99% sure he is on the spectrum. He has these very specific stims. When he's excited about a car engine he fixed or a drawing our daughter made, he flaps his arms up and down. He gets easily overwhelmed by loud noises. But the biggest thing is how he processes confrontation. He doesn't fight or flight, he freezes. He shuts down. His eyes go distant, his shoulders hunch, and he becomes a shell of a person. He is incredibly easy to manipulate because he takes everything literally. If his mom says, "The kids are starving," his brain doesn't see a manipulative woman who spent her grocery money on cigarettes. His brain sees his hungry 5-year-old brother, and he feels a physical pain in his chest until he fixes it. He has been her fixer for a decade, and she knows exactly which buttons to press to make him crumble. Now, we're 23 and 25. We have our own home and a beautiful daughter. Between my job as a paralegal and his work at the shop, we do well. We're comfortable. But for the last 2 years, his mother has treated our bank account like her personal rainy day fund. It started small. $20 here for gas to get to a job interview. She never went. $40 there for diapers. But lately, the numbers have become astronomical. Last month, it was $700 for a car repair that we later found out was actually just a payment to keep the stepfather's lawyer on retainer. My husband will see her name on his phone and his whole demeanor changes. He starts pacing. He starts flapping his hands. He'll look at me with these panicked eyes and say, "I have to give it to her, me. If I don't, she'll call me all night. She'll say I'm a bad brother." He spends hours crafting excuses for why he can't give her money, but as soon as she starts the waterworks, he breaks. He feels this crushing, misplaced guilt for escaping the house while his siblings are still there. The stepfather recently got out of jail. Within a week, he was sent to a state-mandated rehab. MIL claims she hasn't seen a dime of his disability or support money. 2 days ago, we made the mistake of going over there. My husband misses his siblings, he loves those kids, and he wanted them to play with our daughter. The atmosphere in that house is always heavy. It smells like stale smoke and desperation. We were sitting in the living room, and the kids were playing on the floor. My MIL was sitting in her recliner, scrolling on her phone. Suddenly, my husband's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He picked it up, and I saw his face go from pale to gray. He handed it to me. She had texted him. She was sitting 3 feet away from him, and she texted him, "I need $2,000. Son, needs dental surgery for those cavities. The dentist said it has to happen Tuesday. I don't have it. You need to send it by tomorrow morning." $2,000. That is not gas money. That is a mortgage payment and then some. That is our daughter's savings. My husband looked at her, his voice small and trembling. "Mom, I can't do $2,000. We just paid our property taxes. We don't have that kind of liquid cash right now." She didn't even look up from her phone at first. She just sighed, a long, theatrical sound. "Well, I guess he'll just have to live in pain then. I guess his big, successful brother is too busy buying fancy toys for himself to care if his brother's teeth rot out." The fancy toys she was referring to? A $50 sandbox my husband bought for our daughter's birthday. My husband started to rock. I could see the shutdown starting. He tried to explain. "It's not like that, Mom. I work hard, and we have our own bills. I've already given you over $1,000 this month." That's when she lost it. She stood up, her face turning a deep, mottled red. She started screaming. Not just talking loud, but screaming. She called him ungrateful. She said he'd forgotten where he came from. She told him he was turning into his father, a man who abandoned them. Then she said the words that broke the camel's back, "You never do anything for your family." I felt a heat rise up my neck that I have never felt before. I am a paralegal. I spend my days being professional, measured, and calm. But seeing this woman, who hasn't worked a job in 20 years, who let her husband beat her son, who uses her disabled daughter as a guilt trip tool, scream at the man who has been her only lifeline. I snapped. I stood up. I didn't even realize I'd picked up my daughter until I felt her little hands clutching my shirt. I stepped directly into Mil's personal space. "My husband does everything for his family," I said, my voice vibrating with a coldness that surprised even me. I gestured toward our daughter and the door. "We are his family. These children in the other room? They are your siblings, not his children. He is your son, not your child support. He didn't sign up to be a father at 15, but you forced him to be. He doesn't owe you a single penny for the life you failed to provide for them." She stared at me, her mouth hanging open. "He is their brother. He has a responsibility." "No," I cut her off. "He is a 25-year-old man who is being bled dry by a woman who views him as a human ATM. He is not your piggy bank. He is not the stepfather's replacement. And from this moment on, he isn't giving you another cent until you can learn to treat him like a human being instead of a paycheck." She turned to my husband, her eyes welling up with those crocodile tears. "Are you going to let her talk to me like that? Are you really going to let her disrespect your mother?" My husband was staring at his shoes. He was gone. The lights were on, but nobody was home. I didn't wait for him to respond. I knew that if I did, the silence would just give her more room to attack. I handed him the diaper bag and the car keys. "Go to the car," I told him. "Now." He didn't hesitate. He practically ran out the door. I turned back to her one last time. "If you call him tonight, I'm blocking you. If you text him for money again, I'm taking him to change his phone number. You've used him up. There's nothing left for you to take." The car ride home was devastating. My husband didn't say a word. He just gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. When we got home, he put our daughter to bed, went into our room, and just collapsed on the bed. He cried for 2 hours. It wasn't sad crying, it was a release. He told me that for the first time in his life, he felt like he had permission to say no. He told me he's lived in fear of her displeasure his entire life because when he was a kid, her displeasure meant he got ignored or the stepdad got permission to hit him. He admitted that she never asks him how he's doing. She never asks about his job or his hobbies. She only calls when the low balance light on her life is flashing. But now, the flying monkeys have started. His aunt called me today to tell me I was cruel for speaking to a mother that way. My own mother told me that while she agrees with me, I should have stayed out of it and let my husband handle it because now I've emasculated him by fighting his battles. My dad is the only one on my side, but even he says, "You've made a permanent enemy out of her, kid. Hope you're ready for that." The thing is, I don't care if she hates me. I care that my husband can't sleep because he's worried his brother won't get dental work. I care that our savings are being drained by a woman who refuses to work. I've muted her on his phone. I've told him I'll handle all communication for a while. He seems relieved, but there's this lingering shadow of guilt. Should I have just stayed quiet and let him find his own way, even if it meant we'd be broke and he'd be a nervous wreck for another 10 years? Or was I right to finally build the wall he couldn't build himself? Update. I wasn't expecting the response I got. I read through hundreds of comments over the course of a few days. The biggest thing people pointed out was that while I meant well, I had stepped into something that my husband had to ultimately take control of himself. Several people also pointed out something that stuck with me: protecting someone doesn't mean fighting all their battles for them. Sometimes it means helping them build the tools so they can fight them on their own. The other thing that came up again and again was therapy. At first I brushed it off because we're both busy, and honestly my husband has never been the type to talk to strangers about his feelings. But the more I read, the more I realized people weren't suggesting therapy because he was broken. They were suggesting it because he has spent his entire life being conditioned to accept things that aren't normal. Being screamed at, being guilted into paying for everything, being told he was responsible for children that weren't his. That's the kind of thing that leaves marks even when someone grows up and builds a stable life. I talked to him about it a couple days after the post. I didn't frame it as something he needed because of what happened with his mom. I told him I thought it might help with the stress he's been carrying for years. He was hesitant at first. He didn't argue about it, but he also didn't seem convinced it would help. Eventually he agreed to try it once just to see what it was like. The first appointment was quiet. He didn't say much afterward other than that it wasn't as bad as he expected. The therapist apparently asked a lot of questions about his childhood and his relationship with his mother. That alone seemed to open a door he had never really walked through before. Over the next few weeks he kept going. I never pushed him after that first conversation. He scheduled the appointments himself, drove himself there, and came home afterward looking like someone who had just finished sorting through a box of things he hadn't touched in years. During that time his mom didn't stop reaching out. The first few days after the argument she sent messages nonstop. They started angry. Long paragraphs about how he had chosen his wife over his blood and how I had turned him against his family. When those didn't get responses, the tone shifted. Suddenly the messages were about how hard her life was and how she didn't know how she was going to feed the kids. Then it changed again into guilt trips about how his brother's teeth were still hurting. For the first time in years, he didn't send money. At first he just ignored the messages. He read them, put the phone down, and went about his day. I could tell it was difficult because he would get quiet whenever his phone buzzed. But the difference this time was that he didn't panic. The urgency that used to take over him whenever she contacted him just wasn't there in the same way anymore. A few weeks into therapy he sat down with me one night after our daughter went to bed and told me something that surprised me. He said the therapist had asked him a question that he had never considered before: what would happen if he stopped fixing everything for his mother? His answer had always been the same his entire life. He believed everything would fall apart. The kids would suffer, the house would fall into chaos, and it would somehow be his fault. The therapist challenged that idea. Not aggressively, just logically. His mother was an adult. The children had a father, even if that man was unreliable. There were government programs, school resources, extended family members. The world would not suddenly collapse because he didn't send another check. He told me hearing someone say that out loud made something click for him. Not long after that realization, his mother escalated things in a way that forced a confrontation. She showed up at our house without warning one afternoon. I was at work at the time and he was home with our daughter. When I got home he told me what happened. She arrived crying before he even opened the door. The kind of crying that sounds dramatic enough to make neighbors look out their windows. She told him she had been trying to reach him for days and he was ignoring her like she was nothing. Then she started talking about how she didn't have money for groceries and the kids hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days. A few months earlier that kind of statement would have sent him into a panic. This time he asked her a question. He asked if she had contacted the school about lunch programs or reached out to any of the local assistance offices. She didn't answer. Instead she started talking about how families should take care of each other and how hurt she was that he was acting like a stranger. He told her he loved his siblings and he would always care about them, but he was no longer sending money. That responsibility belonged to their parents. According to him the shift in her expression was immediate. The crying stopped and the anger came out. She accused him of abandoning them and said therapy had filled his head with nonsense. At some point she even blamed me again, claiming I was controlling him. He didn't argue. He repeated the same boundary calmly. He would see his siblings when possible and he would help them in ways that didn't involve giving his mother cash. That was it. She left after that, but the situation didn't end there. Over the next couple weeks she tried a series of increasingly dramatic attempts to get his attention again. At one point she sent messages claiming she was about to lose the house unless he sent money immediately. When he didn't respond, she contacted several relatives and told them he had cut her off completely. Some of those relatives reached out to him asking what was going on. Instead of getting defensive, he explained the situation clearly. He told them how much money he had given her over the years and how often she asked for more. A few of them were surprised because they had no idea the amounts had gotten that high. Then came what was probably the most bizarre attempt at getting sympathy. She posted a long message on social media about how her oldest son had abandoned her and left his younger siblings to struggle. She framed it like he had suddenly decided he didn't care about them anymore. The post didn't have the reaction she was probably expecting. A couple people asked questions in the comments about why she was relying on her adult child for that level of financial support. Others pointed out that he had been helping her for years. The conversation turned uncomfortable enough that the post disappeared within a day. The last attempt happened about a month after the original confrontation. She showed up again, this time with the younger kids. From what my husband described, it was clear she was hoping the sight of them would break his resolve. His brother was quiet and his sister was clinging to her arm. He invited the kids inside but asked her to stay on the porch. They played with our daughter in the living room for a while. When it was time for them to leave, he gave them snacks and told them they were welcome to visit again. Before they left, his mother tried once more to push the money conversation. This time he didn't even let it start. He told her he wasn't discussing finances anymore and repeated that she needed to figure out those responsibilities as a parent. She left angry again. The difference now is that the cycle stopped there. She still sends occasional messages, but they're shorter and less frequent. The constant demands have mostly disappeared because they aren't working anymore. My husband is different too. Not in a dramatic personality change way, but in small noticeable ways. He doesn't tense up every time his phone rings. He sleeps better. He's been spending more time doing things he actually enjoys instead of constantly worrying about what crisis might appear next. Therapy has continued, and from what he's shared, it's helping him understand how much pressure he was carrying for years without realizing it. As for me, I've stepped back like many people suggested. I'm still supportive, but I'm not speaking for him or stepping into the middle of conversations with his family. He's handling those boundaries himself now.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update for more such stories.